You've just checked in to Sweet Success. Join me, Katie Cline, for exclusive conversations with hotel executives, hospitality leaders, and industry innovators. Together, we'll uncover the strategies and techniques these masters of hospitality relentlessly refine. Whether you're already in the industry or just starting out, tune in every week to unlock the secret to your sweet success. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sweet Success. I'm your host, Katie Cline, and today I have the honor of having my very dear friend, Crystal Vinisse Thomas, here with us. Crystal is the Vice President and Global Brand Leader for Hyatt's luxury and lifestyle brands, which includes Park Hyatt, Alila, Thompson, Andaz, Dream, Hyatt Centric, and Caption by Hyatt. She and I used to work together at Starwood Hotels and Resorts, where she held a variety of brand management and marketing roles in both New York and Brussels. In between Starwood and Hyatt, Crystal was the brand lead for all things sports at Apple for Beats by Dre. But as an alumni of Cornell University's prestigious hotel school, it's no surprise that she made her way back to hospitality. She was selected as a member of the 40 Under 40 class for Ad Age in 2023 and was recently named on Skift's inaugural list of Generation Next, the Women Shaping Travel's Future. Crystal, it's so lovely to see you. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, of course. I would have it no other way than to be here with you. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And I know I covered a lot in that introduction. To me, it really seems like your life in hospitality started at Cornell. So, what made you want to study there?
Not hospitality, actually. I didn't really get into hospitality or even know of it as a career path until I was on campus there. So when I
Nice.
was looking at colleges, I'm born and raised in Miami, Florida. One thing I knew is that I didn't want to stay in Florida. And so as I was looking at schools, what was important to me was an equitable balance of sports acumen and academic excellence. And so Cornell was just one of those places that had both. They had a very competitive track team and track program, and that was really where I was being recruited at the time. And so when I got on campus, I was a D1 athlete, and I was more in the our college is called Arts and Sciences, but I'd say that's more like the everything college
Mhm.
where I thought I was gonna be an econ major.
Mhm.
And because I was really good at math and all of that, but once I was there, I was like, I feel like there's something else for me," and I wanted to transition to business. And so as I started to kind of, information gather, there were 2 main programs in at Cornell. There was the business program that was part of the architectural school. I mean, sorry, not architecture, the agricultural school, which meant there was a
Mhm.
science requirement. And then there was
Mm.
business program as part of the hotel school, which people position it as it's the number one program of its kind in the world. And it's like a business school, but with a hospitality focus. So for me, that's how I first heard about it. And then I took my first class just to check it out. It was Hotel 101, maybe something like that. Renita McCarthy, and I was just like, "Wait a minute. What is this? What is this world we got going here?" And so that was really my first foray into even understanding or finding out about it as a possible path in the first
So
place.
funny how things happen like that too, right? Because to
Yeah.
me, you're such a hospitality person, right? But if you hadn't gone to that school for the reasons that you outlined, you would have never even known that this world existed.
Yeah, and you never know, right? Like things can come around in different places and ways, but I really am blessed to have known about it that early because even when I look at where I am in my career, a lot of that is attributed to how early I started, right? Like being
Mhm.
an undergrad and certainly another element of what I do, brand, had never heard of, thought of, even up until after I had graduated. So
Wow.
the different moments in time and different experiences and different leaders and mentors in your life can really guide you. But I'd say, when I think about hospitality collectively, the idea of connecting with people with purpose and intention behind that, and then balancing that or fueling that with travel, it just
Mm.
felt like the most amazing combination of, interests and passions for me, and the idea that I could do that for work was amazing. So
My
that's what enamored me a little bit more.
Was there a specific moment in that Hotel 101 class or a specific, lecture or something that you were like, "Whoa, this is it?"
I would say it was more a combination of moments. So taking that class introduced me to the fundamentals of hotels. So
Mm,
I remember one of the first things we covered was what it takes to be a five-star hotel or what it takes to be, the Forbes five-star or the five diamond, right? And so because I was on the track team, I was traveling every weekend. And so I became that obnoxious teammate where now I'm in the hotel and I'm like, they don't have a phone in the bathroom, so they could never be five diamonds. And I started to just point out everything. And I didn't realize that I was retaining or even cared about that until I just started to see hotels in a different light, and I became a
mhm,
nerd about it. And so it was really just a combination of the experiences coupled with what I was learning about the foundation and the function of a hotel that just started to enamor me even more. And I just once I get really into something, I go down a rabbit hole. And so
yeah.
that actually started the process of me internally transferring to the hotel school.
Mm. I remember when phones in the bathroom were like the height of luxury. So I am with you on that. That was like the coolest thing for me when I was on family vacations. Like, I'm calling you from the bathroom.
Like, this is a big deal, guys. They've
This is a
invested
big
here.
deal.
Yeah.
And I know, like, to this day, you still do a lot of work with your alma mater. You give back, you do speaking engagements for
Yeah.
students there. Do you remember being a student and having hotel executives come in and talk to you? And is it surreal to be on the other side of the podium now?
Katie, it's crazy. I'm like, "What?" I remember so there's a course in at the hotel school called Dean's Distinguished Lecture Series. It's
Mhm,
as a freshman, it is a mandatory course during the fall semester. Every Friday, you had to and I don't know how much they've evolved it now. I have an idea, but every Friday, I think it was like 1 o'clock or whatever time it was, you had to dress up. So imagine it's the end of the week, at the end of the
mhm,
day that you got to dress up and go to this class to listen to an industry expert. And, one of the biggest highlights for me was Sheila Johnson, who co-founder of BET and
mhm.
CEO and founder of Salamander Hotels. And she has she's part of the biggest golf networks too, where the
Oh,
PGA Tour is, part of her hotels are part of that. And just seeing this Black woman in this space and the entire semester, she might have been the only person who looked like me
mm,
representing what was considered to be industry excellence and expertise. And so that really created a visual for me of, oh, wow, like there is a path and it takes on so many different places. Bill
mm,
Marriott had also come and spoken, and we had a number of leaders that we would consider titans and powerhouses in this industry. And thank you for bringing this up because it's still a very meaningful moment that a year ago I got a note from the dean of the hotel school asking me to be a guest lecturer for DDLS. And I was like, "Who me? Are you haven't I you sure you mean this Crystal Vinisse Thomas? Have I done enough? I don't know." And it was just so humbling, and also when
mm,
you think about as confident and you know me, like, one thing Crystal never has a problem with is confidence, but
yeah,
that doesn't mean that you also there's a level of humility that's there, and, imposter syndrome, like, have do I have enough to talk about? Will they really take me seriously as a leader in this industry? I
mm,
mean, shouldn't they be asking and by the way, my CEO was a guest lecturer the semester before, and my
wow,
CHRO was a guest lecturer during that time. So, wait, you're asking me to come back and be on the same stage and offer up, obviously for my own purview, but the same kind of intent as my CEO, right? And
yeah.
so it was just, and I actually still have here my distinguished lecture. So a very meaningful moment to be able to go back and, everything be full circle. And my mom was able actually to attend that, which was even better for me.
How special. I mean, I think it's amazing for someone like yourself to talk about imposter syndrome because,
Mm.
first of all, I do know how confident you are. But secondly, you are so accomplished, whether you feel it every single day or not. And I think it just proves the humanness of us all, right? That no
Totally.
matter what level we're at, we're still kind of looking over the shoulders and being like, "Are you sure you're talking to me? You want me to come and speak on that stage?"
Absolutely, yeah. It's huge, and not everyone experiences that. The data shows that some communities more than other,
Mhm.
statistically significant gaps exist between, how women apply for roles or at what point they feel comfortable applying for roles based on how accomplished they think they are. And you look at the
Sure.
other side of it and the mentality is sometimes can figure it out, and
Mm.
so we like to have things figured out all the way to a T sometimes, and so, yeah, every day, and even as I continue in my job here, I have moments where I'm leading a team and it's getting bigger and bigger, and I question, "Okay, am I giving them the right guidance? Am I giving them a solid vision? Does it make sense? Am I wrong?" You know?
Mm.
But I think that just continues to make me better, right? And having that lens only makes me, a better resource for my team because not only am I challenging them, I'm challenging myself every day.
Yeah. And when you walked into Cornell for that speech and you had those little whispers of imposter syndrome in the back of your head, what did you do to tackle it? Were you just like, "Be quiet and let me focus," or do you have any tips or tricks for the rest of us out here struggling with it still?
That's a good question. For me, it's interesting when I get moments like that, whether it's having a conversation with a friend on a podcast or walking onto a stage in front of 100 people or 1,000, as soon as that transition happens, it's like I'm a whole nother person. It's almost like, okay, not to compare myself to Beyonce, but Beyonce's got Sasha Fierce and she's got Beyonce Knowles, right? I become my version of that when I'm in the moment. And
Mhm.
what ends up being validating is watching it, feeling it, and experiencing it in real time. There's
Mhm.
no amount of preparation, I think, that can fully eliminate whispers of imposter syndrome and those, ways that we look at ourselves with a critical eye. And I think that's okay, to my previous point about continuing to push yourself to be greater. But what I would say is when you're in the moment, it washes away because I stand there like, I do know what I'm talking about. And you see the I hear myself say something out loud and I'm like, girl, that sounded smart. And then you see the audience resonating with you too. It's like, okay, he's nodding his head.
Right.
Okay. And then the Q&A comes or, you continue to talk and someone asks you a question and you say, I am able to answer that question, right? And
Mhm.
so it just becomes validating and you go, "Girl, you got receipts, you have experiences that you're speaking to and connecting to these people in meaningful ways." And so, yeah, you got this. And so I just say, the advice is to walk in it. You might have that whisper of, yeah, you should probably do a little bit more. But once you start walking in it and just as your gate just opens up as you continue to walk that distance, you get a little bit more confident. You might start off, with a little bit of a small stride, but once you get that bigger stride, it just kind of happens naturally, I think, once you just continue to believe in yourself and open the door and walk through it.
And at a certain point, it's almost not about you, right? Like you shared how that first speaker that you saw, seeing almost yourself represented on that stage, and then what you were able to do for students who are looking at you,
Yeah.
that's almost empowering enough right there.
That has started to become the reason I do it,
Mhm.
because there are so not even touching on the representation element of things where there aren't a lot of people who look like me in the rooms that I sit in, but even more than that, the language that I use and the way that I'm
Mhm.
able to connect with people, especially young people, and then to hear their stories or see the emails from people to say, "Wow, I've never seen anyone speak about this topic in this way and in a way that felt natural and connected with me. Wow, I've never seen a woman like you in a role like this.
Mhm.
And I didn't even know what you do was a thing. And now I'm inspired to go and do something else." And to be able to connect with people in that way and hear their personal stories and then even hear how their stories are aligned with mine. I mean, even as small as, hey, I grew up in an underrepresented community. I grew up in the projects and, I went from here to an Ivy League and I was on
Mhm,
financial aid and all of these things, hardships and challenges that came in the way. Literally, there was a young woman after that lecture that had a very similar trajectory in her life, personal circumstances as I did. And I get chills thinking about it because I was like, no, there's literally another me out there,
mhm,
and for
mhm.
her, I was who she could be, and I was like, "What? Who, me? Again?"
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what? And so, when I think about that and what my words and my presence can represent for others to find that confidence and find a path, it's very, again, humbling, and it gives you a greater reason to do, what I do.
yeah. I love what you're saying too about almost giving yourself a moment to reflect on how far you have come and
Mhm.
kind of celebrate that, not just for you, but for people in the audience. And I really liked what you said about alter egos and
Yeah,
Beyonce with Tasha Fierce. I had a moment like this recently, which will make you laugh, of course. I was doing the photo shoot for the cover art for this podcast. And you know me, I am not used to being in front of the camera. I feel super awkward. I was like, this is really strange for me, but I also know that the more awkward you feel, it's gonna convey through the pictures, right?
yeah.
And I wanted the picture to really look like myself, and I thought, "Okay, I'm gonna have an alter ego," and the first person who came to mind was Barbara Corcoran, of all people.
Okay, alright. Get
So
it.
random. I told my friend that, and she was like, "You picked a 70-year-old," and I was like, "A 70-year-old real estate tycoon is who I
Oh,
chose."
wow, look at that. I'm not mad at that, but that gave
But
you
you know what?
something
It
to walk
works.
in. Yeah, I
It
love
works.
that, and it's even what you were just saying about the moments of awkwardness, I'd take that a step further and to say that it's not real or worth it if you're not feeling something, in
Mhm.
those moments. Like, I'll never forget small anecdote and side story, but we were planning a brand meeting, like a huge global meeting, and it was, I think in my career, maybe one of the first times that, like, I think I had just been promoted, and I was sitting at the same table as my CMO at the time, Phil McAveety. I'll shout him out
Mm, of
at
course.
Starwood days, and that I was presenting next. And again, never have a confidence problem with speaking. It's my put a mic in my hand and I will go on a journey. I love it. But I'm sitting there and I'm shaking and all of a sudden I'm freezing. I was like, it's so cold in here, Phil, right? Isn't it cold in here?" And he's like, "Sounds like you're nervous." I was like, "I'm not nervous. I'm not nervous. I'm never nervous. I love speaking. I love doing this. I know what I'm talking about." He was like, and he gets up and he walks out. He just walks away. And I was like, "All right, cool." He comes back with a mug of like either coffee or tea. I can't remember. He was like, "Just hold this in your hand. It'll warm you up." And he goes, "Hey, point of advice. I get nervous every time too. And if you're not nervous, it's not worth it. You're not doing anything that matters, that moves you. So always be nervous." And I was like, that's a bar, right? And I walked on that stage, and as soon as I got, past the 3rd step, it went I was nervous, literally shaking up until I walked onto the stage, and it just went away. And, I saw the lights and the people, and I just went into my, "Hey, y'all," and
Yeah,
so I take that with me to this day, and it might sound things that seemingly seem easy or otherwise, we still get a little bit of that nervous energy and awkwardness too, but that tells us that we care about what we're doing.
I love that story. I have actually always felt like nerves are life's way of telling you you're still alive. Like, you're still
Absolutely.
here, you're still
Yeah,
feeling something, and like you said, you're doing something that you're invested in, that you care about the outcome of. How
yeah.
cool is that?
Chase the nerves.
Yeah, chase
Yeah.
the nerve. I love that. So let's talk about Starwood since you brought up
Yeah.
Mr. Bill McAveety. We, of course, worked together there. That's where our love story began. Feels like a lifetime ago now, but
Monaco.
obviously, from the moment I met you, I was super
Yeah.
impressed by you. But shall we share with the listeners perhaps your first impression of me?
Man, like, listen, I was late as usual walking into some meeting, And I just remember and I think it was a global meeting where all of our regions were coming together, and did I live in Brussels at the time? Maybe?
No, not yet. You were
Um,
about to move.
oh, I didn't, okay.
Mhm.
So, walking into this room, and I recognized most of the people except maybe 2 people, Katie Cline being one of them. And she's just sitting there. Here's this new, perfectly blonde, cut-haired woman with this huge brimmed, and I say huge because I speak with dramatic language, but it might be a similar brim, maybe a little wider than this, what you got on, burgundy hat. And I'm like I lean over to Estella, "Who was that?" She looked a little too confident, and I don't know who she is, but I just remember thinking, wow, what a presence that you had and the gall to be wearing this hat in front of all these people. But then meeting you and just having that immediate energy that brought the wall down. Oh, she don't think she all that. She's cool. Oh, I still look back on that story of just like, not that hats weren't accepted, but I was like, oh, she's trying to show up and be seen. I see you. I see you.
It's amazing how first impressions are, and to be honest, I was probably wearing a hat. I do love hats, and for listeners who can't see me, I am, of course, wearing a signature hat right now, but a lot of times when I wore a hat, it was because I was too lazy to wash my hair.
Oh,
So
I love when
people would be like,
practical
"Oh, it's a
supersedes
look," and I'm
style.
like, "Is it or is it laziness?" I'm not sure.
That's funny. That is hilarious. I do love that, like, when I compliment my friends, they're just like, "Oh, your hair looks great." "Oh, probably because I haven't washed it in 3 days." It's like, "Okay, alright." You never know, but that's
But it's
funny.
so true because, I was intimidated by you, and I think because you were like, "Who is this girl in a hat?" I was like, "This girl does not like me very much," but
Oh,
all of
no.
my coworkers are like, "She is incredible, she's so great," and then it took, one conversation and we were like, "Oh, we're friends."
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, I have gotten that feedback before that I'm not always the most warm if you're just looking at me. Right? Like my facial expressions, I've grown a lot, but I have that resting face, as they would say
No,
sometimes.
I would say
Um,
you're kind of like assessing people, like, you're just
yeah,
kinda like, "What's your deal?" And then you're
yeah.
very quick to let people in. You just are like, "Tell me tell me a little
You're
about you
absolutely
first."
my mom even talks about that. She's like, "Crystal has always been so observant, even as a child. I wouldn't immediately run up to people, or if they came up to me, I'd kinda size them up."
Mm,
And even to this day, I don't size people up, but I'm very aware and very observant, and I think that goes back to when we're talking about connecting with people, and that's a gift and an art and a science too, and so
mhm.
when you're able to I can pick up on mannerisms really quickly. My colleagues even talk about how, sometimes I imitate some of our colleagues just because I've recognized how they move,
Yeah.
how the cadence of their voice changes and their tone. I've just always been like overly aware of others' mannerisms, and that enables me to connect with them on a deeper level. So you're absolutely right. There is a level of assessment that's happening, not overtly, by the way. I don't know that it's happening. It's a subconscious thing. So don't think people, if you're listening out here, that every time she walks in the room, she's judging you. It's not on purpose. It's a gift. It's a gift.
I do think your observation skills are probably what also help you
Mm,
cross cultures, I would say, because there are certain things that are inappropriate in certain parts of the world and are more appropriate here and there. And I think the way that you're able to kind of pick up on things that aren't being said as much as the things that are have
yeah.
probably really helped you in your career.
That's huge. And can you imagine what that's like on Zoom now?
Right.
Trying to read through how someone's reacting to something you're presenting or even your vibe and energy. And
Yeah.
I've become even more hyper aware of that because, when you're meeting new people in virtual conditions, and I'm blessed to be fully remote, I live in LA, and my team is remote as well. So there's a way
Mhm.
that you have to continue to connect with, pour in to people in a way that's meaningful, but with the barrier of distance and being in front of people in real life. So it really is even more important now more than ever.
And group calls when people might all be on mute and you say a joke or something that's meant to be funny and like Are people even responding to
Of
it? Are
course.
they silently laughing on the screen or
Oh my gosh, and even, like, these bigger presentations where it's more of a webinar, and
Right.
I'm someone who thrives look, I grew up in the Black church, so we're all about call and response, and I thrive on the engagement and the energy that I get from that response in an audience, and so now we're in
Mhm,
this world where we have to kinda do both, and so
mhm,
and maintain that energy, right? Which you can tell is harder for some than others.
yeah. So I wanna go back to Starwood. Shortly after I started there, you did something that I really admired. You moved to Europe,
Mm,
Brussels specifically.
yep.
What made you make that move in the first place, and how do you think living abroad impacted your life and your career?
Yeah, that's a great loaded question. It's a simple one, but the impact has been great. I mean, it kinda goes back to your point about when you're observing people and understanding the nuance of cultural norms and otherwise. I don't know that I would have gotten that without that experience living
Mm,
abroad and actually experiencing and understanding and being immersed in other cultures outside of the US. When I was at Starwood, I was in a global role and I was traveling a lot outside of the States. I lived in New York City, arguably, one of the most international cities. That said, there's something different about, okay, traveling to a place and being there for a moment in time than actually living there and being immersed within it. Right. And so
mhm,
I remember just reflecting and thinking, how am I truly in a global role if I've only lived in the United States and
mhm,
I've only lived in one country and one culture? Surely I'd be more impactful, not only in my work, but in my worldview if I have an experience that extends beyond this experience because the world
mhm.
is much bigger than the West, even though we don't often think or believe that. And
Mhm.
so it was really important to me that if I was going to be a leader in whether it's this industry or another, that I actually had a global worldview.
Mm,
And so I raised my hand, and I didn't care if it was in Asia Pacific or if it was in the EME region, Europe, Africa, and Middle East. I just knew I wanted to get somewhere and really immerse myself in what it meant to live outside of the US. And so that was able to happen. That's very passive language, but we made that happen by way of our a great role in Brussels, which is where our EME office was located. And I'd say I spent 3 years there and the beauty of working in Europe is, I mean, you can be on a plane or a train for 45 minutes, and 45 minutes later, you're in a different culture where a different language is spoken, a different religion is observed, and people look completely different than, just from an hour away. And that happens over and over and over again. And the nuance between that is just so eye opening.
yeah.
And the other element of that that's fascinating is those outside of the US have a perspective of the US that is
Mhm.
often either oversimplified or, as much as folks make fun of Americans and Westerners for not knowing as much about the world, they don't know as much about America as they claim to know either, right? And so it's interesting. They're like, "Oh, you live in New York? How long does it take to get to LA? I'm going to New York. Can I just fly? What is that, like an hour and a half flight?" And it's like, the US is big, homie. But, to round back to your question, I think it's just made me it's given it's been such a gift to be able to go into my mental arsenal and be able to empathize with different cultural nuances. And I see the world in a much bigger, more substantive light because of the experiences I've had with different cultures and different people and different languages and then being immersed within it. I don't think I'd be able to inform the work I do had I not had that experience in as meaningful of a way.
I couldn't agree more. I think you were also a really big inspiration for me when I eventually moved to London in the same way, and I had the exact same thought of, like, talk about imposter syndrome. Like, I'm sitting here in this global role, yet for me, I'm from New York and I'm living in New York. I mean, I spent 4 years in upstate New York for university, but other than that, I hadn't really left. at
Yeah.
least for you, in addition to Brussels, you were from Miami, you've lived in Boston, Atlanta, San Francisco, Ithaca for school, of course,
Mm.
New York, now LA, and obviously have
Mhm.
spent some time in Chicago. And yes, those are all in the same country,
Barcelona
but
as
oh,
well.
and Barcelona as well.
Yeah, and that was the first place I lived after I was going on sabbatical for a little bit.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow. So we focus first on the US cities. I mean, like you said, they're the same country, but obviously the country is vast.
Mhm.
Did which one of those did you like living in the most? Is it LA since you're still there right now? And do you think those different places shaped your perspective, or do you
Yeah.
feel like US is US is US?
Well, that's a great question because that's another notable difference when you talk to people who live outside of America. They see it as this monolith. And I don't want to say everyone thinks that collectively,
Mm,
but a lot of my experience in
wow.
talking to people, it was just like, oh, you Americans. And I would have so many conversations where I'd say, listen, the culture within America is just as diverse, but in a different way. And we see it in
Mhm.
the climate we're in now, right? A New York American is very different than a Texan American, then a Floridian American. And then in Florida, a Miami person is very different than, though you go 2 hours up and you're in country land. Okay. Like you might as well be in Georgia in some places. And so there's just we have this amazing melting pot of a country where culturally it is vast, it is nuanced, and we happen to be in the same nation. That said, to answer your question, I still feel like I've been to, over 50 countries. I've been all around the world, and I still feel that New York City is one of the best cities in the world.
Mm,
And I love all that it offers, all that it brings, and all that it stands for in so many ways. My
mm,
family is from there. I was part of the first generation born in Miami, but we're from the panhandle part of Florida, and there was some migration that happened to go north, and they ended up in New York on both sides, actually. I'd say my time in LA, as you get older and as you develop and grow your communities and your village, I have such an amazing and fantastic village here in LA, and as much as I would have over 10 years ago, even moving to Brussels, I would have said, "I'll live anywhere." And I
mm,
and I did say that, and I meant it. Today, I will not live anywhere
mm.
because what living in Brussels actually showed me is that, oh, these other things matter too,
Right,
relative to how you are or what informs your happy, what informs your joy. And for
right.
me, it's become my village.
Mm,
And so I'd say LA, I've been holding on to it because I have such an amazing village here. My best friend is here. She's on baby number 3, and I'm the godmom, and they have just lit up my world. And I've always been open about the fact that I would like to remain child free, and that'll continue, but what a blessing and happy medium to have and be able to tap into that family there. And then beyond her, I have so many other really close friends that make up my community, that make up my village, that pour into me, that I'm able to pour into when I get here, and I don't wanna lose that. And
right.
so, when I think about where I wanna live and where I'm happy, that's probably the top of what informs that for me these days.
Yeah. And of course, in Brussels and in Barcelona, you didn't have that. But what I
Mm,
think is also interesting about those cities, particularly Barcelona, that I'd love to hear about, is the lack of speaking the language, right? I mean, obviously in Brussels, you kind of have three principal languages, but being the home of the EU, English is really widely spoken. I understand, but you tell me if I'm right or wrong on that. But in
right.
Barcelona, this is a country that Spanish is the first language. So do you speak Spanish, and how did you navigate that? In the heart of Soho, New York City's arts and culture hub, lies your luxurious escape, the Dominic Hotel. Experience unparalleled amenities, including king size beds, spacious rooms, a fully equipped fitness center, a seasonal rooftop pool, and the renowned Sisley Spa. Savor Hawaiian inspired bites and cocktails at Terrace on 7 or innovative dishes at the Michelin starred Vestry. Book today using special code SUCCESS, that's SUCCESS, for 20% off your next stay of 2 nights or more in a suite through the end of the year. Visit thedominichotel.com to book. The Dominic, where every moment is an indulgence.
Yeah, that's a good question too. So what I'd say about Brussels is the The example I always give is when I was telling my people and friends and family at home that, "Oh, I'm moving to Brussels," they're like, "Oh my god, that is so cool. Wow, you're getting out of the country, you're going to Europe. That sounds fantastic. Oh, how fancy, how chic." When I told a European that I was moving to Brussels, they were like, "Ooh, sorry for you. Is everything okay? You're doing this on purpose?" Or like,
Blink
much
twice. You need
much
help.
respect to the Belgians out there, but the reception was different, and again, we romanticize Europe, we
Yes.
romanticize Asia, but it's so much more. I remember someone saying, "That's like saying you're going to Idaho," like, who's getting excited about that? So, Brussels was hard for I learned very quickly how challenging, or at least the thought behind that hesitance from the people who knew me
Mm,
specifically. Just the Brussels is a great place at that time, people with families, being young, single, and probably looking for a little bit more. It was very hard because of the lack of community. And it was such a transient city. Like you said, it was the center of the EU. So many people who were there were on assignment. And
mhm.
so, because there's something different about how you move when you know that you have an exit date. And
Yeah.
so, no one
Yeah.
was really interested in connecting with people in a substantive level, or at least those who I would have wanted to hang out with. It was kinda, like, very surface because it's like, "Look, Imma be out here in a few months, so." And then just adjusting to the nuance of, okay, culturally, people don't eat on the go. They sit down. They go out for lunch, and they're out for an hour, and they're sitting at a table, and they're being served, and maybe there's a glass of wine. And at night, you're eating in with your family.
Mhm.
So, for me, who came from New York City, I'm now in this city where I'm working until 6, 6:30. All of my colleagues have left because
Mhm.
work-life balance is a lot better.
Right.
And then I'm going home at 7-ish. Now I'm ready to eat, and guess what? My options are very low because the restaurant across the street closed at 7:30, the other one closed at 8.
Wow.
Delivery is not a thing because, again, people eat at home or they eat
Right.
out with their family. So that was actually the biggest adjustment for me
Hmm.
culturally, just the way we moved. We moved a lot faster and things were more convenient. What I found in many places in Europe is folks don't move based on convenience. They move based on comfort in life, and, like, it can actually be slow,
Yeah.
and that was hard to adjust to. On the language question, yeah, they had 3 official languages, and none of them were English:
Mm.
French, Flemish, and German. And
Mm.
so, while work life was conducted in English, everything else in Brussels Center was mostly French.
Mm.
So, most of the people in Brussels, the everyday, when I went to Hema, or this basically their version of, the grocery store, or, Target, which wasn't Target, I was looking at labels in French and Flemish. I was
Um,
talking to people who could not even just the simplest English words because it's not their language, just like we wouldn't know the simplest words in other languages that are foreign
right.
to us, couldn't understand me. And so that my everyday at work was fine, but the everyday, navigating, figuring out, "Is this whipped cream or is this heavy cream?"
Right.
Was a little bit different. I grew up in Miami, so Spanish is a lot easier. I can get by. I thrive in Spain. That's my favorite part of the world. I love being in Spain and Portugal, and I happen to had some really close friends there, and I was able to be really immersed in Barcelona. I know the city well. It's also
Mhm.
very international, although Spanish is, obviously the main language, in Catalan, a lot of very international city. A lot of
Right.
people move there from within Europe. So you have kind of a village there of people who speak English and Spanish and German and all the things. So
Right.
Barcelona was actually easier to navigate from a language perspective than Brussels.
Yeah, it sounds like Brussels, the language barrier is added to that feeling of isolation of no one wants to go out to dinner, and even if I wanna walk around and buy myself dinner at the grocery store, I can't even tell you what I'm buying.
Listen, that you just worded it perfectly, just
Mm.
amplifying the feeling of isolation, that I had never felt more alone
Mm.
than when even, I was really close to my colleagues too, and my boss, and we had a nice network. but when you go home, you're going home, right?
Right.
And things close early, like I said, and there's not like a real active thing unless you wanted to go to a pub and drink for the rest of the night, which was fine for a few days,
Right.
but not every day,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, it was really tough.
Well, I imagine this is also why you really prioritize your village, as you said, now, because
Yeah.
you've lived without and now you've lived with, and you're like, I'll take this route,
That's
please.
exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. You can be grateful for the experience, for all that it taught you, right?
Sure.
And also all that it shows you because, I'd even say, again, I'd live anywhere, but now it's like, you know the criteria that you're
Yeah.
looking for through each experience. And that applies to jobs, that applies to managers, right? I learned the type of manager I wanted to be based
Mhm.
on what I wasn't getting
Right.
or based on what I was getting that I didn't want.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
I think you kinda with every scenario and experience, you kinda get a little bit of that insight.
Yeah, I also really liked what you said about you move very differently if you have an exit date, and I felt that totally when we moved to London. We were there indefinitely. So we
Right,
were looking to build a life there. We were looking to get under the cover of what London is and not leave every chance we had. And I
yeah.
remember we met an American couple, which I did try to stay away from the fellow Americans and meet more people, but they just keep coming and getting attracted to us.
Yeah,
And, they were like, "We're here for 2 years, and every weekend we're gonna go see another European country." I was like,
yeah.
"That's not the experience I'm here for."
Yeah. Well, that was exactly how I was thinking about living in Brussels. Once I
Mhm.
knew, although I was there indefinitely, because I was in that isolation, I'm like, well, I'm just gonna go everywhere in Europe. And so
Right,
every weekend I went someplace different.
right.
And so it is interesting how
Yeah, you
that
made the
works.
most of it.
Yeah.
So let's change gears and focus on today. You are the brand leader for just so many incredible brands. What are
Thank
you currently working on at Hyatt?
So many things. The beauty of my role is the complexity of my role.
Mhm.
Or at least for me, there's a lot of context switching that happens when I go from luxury, like Park Hyatt and how we're trying to reestablish and reimagine what luxury looks like to this date for today's traveler and
Right,
how does Park Hyatt continue to evolve and pioneer within that segment. And so that really excites me. We did a lot of research on today's luxury consumer, what drives them, how they've evolved, what the expectations are. And, that's when I become a nerd
yeah,
about things because everything I do is driven by the guest, right? Like we wouldn't have this industry if we didn't have an audience to cater to who, had certain expectations. And when we think about hospitality as a segment in an industry, the core of what we do is meeting and anticipating the needs of those who stay with us and travel with us if you're in airlines or other things. So that luxury consumer really can serve as the halo for how we think about other brands within hospitality as well. So I'd say that's taken up a lot of beautiful headspace,
yeah,
nerding out on that. On the other side of it, if I look at lifestyle, we've done some really dope rebrands, with Thompson Hotels and Andaz. We had our first global brand campaign in a while last year with our new brand refresh. The brand has really evolved into this vibrant platform for creative and self-expression. And when you think about what it means to travel and reimagine what travel looks like and use your imagination throughout that process, we really want Andaz to be a conduit to living out maybe an expression of things that you never imagined at home, but could imagine doing when you travel. And so,
right,
DAS has been keeping me busy and thinking about the different collabs that we can unearth to showcase that and provide more experiences to guests that enable that exploration, that self exploration, especially. So
right.
those are a couple highlights. I mean, I could keep going all day, but those are a
Yeah.
couple highlights.
And, you're talking about the rebrand for Andaz specifically. How would you, and I know this is a big question, but like, how would you explain your approach to brand building? And do you think it varies by brand or are the steps more or less the same? Or does the price point play into it?
Yeah, I'd say the steps remain pretty consistent, right? I think if anything, you're probably looking at different things along the way. So you always want to start with the insight. I don't want to do anything without the consumer insight, because what you end up doing is you build something that's nice and pretty and sounds great to a bunch of executives or a bunch of people who think they know, and then you put it in front of a guest or consumer and they're like, "What is this? Who is
Right.
this for?" And then you can't even articulate who it's for. So
Mhm.
the first step, I think, in any brand positioning exercise should be the consumer insight. And then
Mhm.
the next one is the industry and landscape insight, right? Like, what are we seeing in the industry in this segment? What are our competitors doing? Where's the white space? How can we go back to the insight, meet that need and that expectation of our consumer and our guests in a way that's meaningful and still relevant to the world that we're in today. So, a real time example of that is, okay, you might have a consumer insight that says, "Hey, I want more personalization." What does that mean in a world where TikTok and social media is at the forefront of how people engage with brands, right? And
Mhm.
so, thinking about that and connecting those dots is really important. And so, for me, it's always starting with that insight that drives what need you're trying to meet, but also being mindful and very aware of where your brand came from, maintaining that authenticity within that. Because I think another mistake that many brands make is, as time evolves and things change, they might think that they need to change too. And while evolving is important, we know Gen Z and Gen Alpha now are, and by the way, millennials ran so they could walk. I just want to say that really value, and I'm going to use this word and I know it's overused, but it's real authenticity, right? Like,
Mhm.
they can see right through you when you're not being true to who you are. And whether or not you can meet their need, they'll respect you more if you're being who you are. And so the biggest thing I push when we do any brand positioning exercise is, who are we? Who do we want to be? And how do we maintain that no matter who the guest is, right? How you cater to them may change and evolve based on, their needs, but you can still do it through the lens of your brand and your essence and your identity.
Absolutely.
And
And
yes, it varies by brand,
yeah,
how that shows up.
I could imagine. And
Yeah.
speaking of varying by brand, let's talk about the power of events. You and I worked on a lot of really great ones together at W Hotels. I know at Thompson, you just recently led the Culture Lives Here series.
Sure.
So, what does a good branded event look like? And touching on what you just said about authenticity, how do you bring that authenticness through in a live event?
I think this is where the locale is really important. So I mentioned you starting with a consumer insight, and that's important. And then one thing we do know is, when you travel to a hotel, not everyone, right? Like, many guests still do want the comfort and familiarity of a cookie cutter product and asset that, no matter where I am in the world, I know the experience I'm going to get. It can look exactly the same and I like it. I won't
Yeah.
mention some competitors that do that, but that's not the world I live in. I live in a world where the consumers that we're trying to meet are those who are inspired by the differences in the destinations that they're experiencing and the
Yeah.
nuance of that, and they want to be immersed in that. And I think any good event or experience within hospitality especially is one that leads with what's relevant to the destination and showcasing that to a consumer base or a guest in a way that they can't get anywhere else. And so that's always my hope and drive for any experience that we produce. First of all, the overarching North Star for my team is what I say, and I didn't make it up. I got this from the culture at when I was working at Beats, but it was NBDB, never been done before. What can we do that our guests haven't seen? And if they've seen it, how do we show it to them in a different way?
Mm.
And when you're able to create an experience that connects with that consumer, the insight or whatever they're looking for, that connects with the locale. So making sure that it's relevant to where I'm traveling. And even if I'm a local, right? Because that's become a big part of our business too, in the lifestyle segment, especially, is we want the neighbor to be in our spaces as much as our out of town guests. So how do we do that in a meaningful way when obviously when you live in a destination, you have a lot of options.
Yeah.
Whereas the guest, right, the convenience of it being in the hotel already, eliminates the barrier.
Right.
But that's where that difference can be the difference that makes the difference is really how immersed are you in the neighborhood and the locale. And then the third piece is how do you do it in a way that is still true to who you are,
Mhm.
back to that authenticity. And that's what we've really tried to achieve with the Culture Lives Here platform you just mentioned, where we've identified who we call culture shifters. You can call them tastemakers or whatever phrasing, but it really is focused on people and creatives within a destination or community that's really pushing and shifting the culture of their craft
Hmm.
within that destination. So whether you're a designer, an artist, a musician, how are you showing or showcasing your locale, your community, your city, how you repping your city through your art, and then how do we put that in front of guests in a way that they haven't seen before. We have a number of events that we've fostered to try to showcase that. In New York, we had one of our culture shifters, Daniel J. Watts. He's an actor and playwright and poet. He did a whole 30-minute one-man show, pieces that he wrote with live music, and he was changing in real time without leaving the stage. And
Wow.
so that kind of experience where, yeah, you've seen a play before, you've seen Broadway in New York, but we just brought you a version of it that is relevant to New York. He's
Yeah.
doing something that's a little bit different and it's in our space and really taps into the idea of culture shifting and culture living within our walls at Thompson. So that's one example, but I think those three pillars are really important to creating meaningful experiences that guests will connect to.
And those people that you're partnering with are locals to the places that they're performing, right? So that really goes back to what you were saying too of the importance of bringing the local community in. Not only are you physically bringing these people who live there, but then you're giving locals something that they couldn't get elsewhere.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
They've gotta be there. We're not gonna fly in somebody from Texas and s to New York and say they're a culture shifter in New York, right?
Right.
Because for me, it's never about the and look, I get in trouble for this sometimes too because I'm like, "I don't care how many followers you have. What's your engagement? Who's connecting to what it is that you do?" I
Mhm.
will always choose the more authentic and relevant and real person over the person with a or over the influencer that has the million followers.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question for you because I could talk to you forever before I ask you the final 3 questions that I ask
Okay.
everybody. But
Yeah.
do you have any predictions for the future of hospitality?
Oh,
Oh, this is a big one. Don't
oh
let
my
Cornell
god.
down, Crystal.
Like that, I could go a few different ways here, but I think we've really one thing I'm passionate about, as you can tell, and you know me well as well, is just how we show up better and more meaningfully within the culture of the world, not just the culture of our industry. I think hospitality the question was about hospitality, right? I
Mhm.
think hospitality is often we're so insular and as many of the we can talk about every big hospitality company has over 500 brands at this point and
Mhm.
we're a little bit everywhere and there's it's becoming smaller and smaller as it gets bigger and bigger, right? And we have a tendency, I think, to be very insular in what we do. And I think it is a responsibility of us as when you think about this industry and how far reaching it is, it's so important to meet people where they are. And that means we can't just be showing up at the travel conferences and the hospitality, this and that, because as big as the industry is, it still is very niche. And I talk to people every day who have never heard of what we consider to be some of the most iconic brands in hospitality. Why? Because we spend so much time just talking to each other. And
Right.
so maybe changing your question to be, what are my predictions? I'd rather address like what do I think the needs are in order to
Yeah.
continue to be relevant. Like we need to show up in the moments that matter. We need to mix culture and opportunity with hospitality and meet our guests and consumers where they are, because if we don't, we will continue to be more of a transactional industry when really we want to be part of the fabric of people's lives.
Mm,
We know that the number one driver of decision making when it comes to hotels is location.
mhm,
But I'd rather it be driven by where is a Thompson? Because
mhm,
that is the culture of a brand that I am aligned with, and I'm going to build my travel around that. And
right.
some brands do have that, right? Especially when you think about the more leisure segments, right? Where you go to a resort or a destination based on what they're offering. But I do think hospitality is going to get squeezed tighter and tighter as we continue to grow, but we're not focusing on being a part of culture in a more meaningful way that's beyond the transactional moments in time.
I've never thought about it like that, but you're so right. Like, if we look at TV or music or movies, they are
Sports.
sports, they're part of the cultural zeitgeist. They almost are the cultural zeitgeist themselves. But
Yeah.
yet you're right. We're kind of like on the sidelines, like, if you're going to that game, you can come stay with us.
Yes, exactly. Isn't that crazy? Like,
Yeah.
why can't I be I mean, think about it, Katie, like, there are people who they spend years saving for one trip
Yeah.
to Disney or one trip to Bali. I
Yep.
mean, people plan their lives around the one trip sometimes,
Yeah.
and but do we really wanna be part of just that one moment?
Right.
Like, I think we owe it to the guests and consumers that are spending saving their hard-earned money for this one moment to be part of their lives even more so and beyond that, and what an incredible opportunity for us to have that level of impact on people that they'd see the value in saving for that moment, but I think
Yeah.
we can show up a little bit earlier, in their process.
Well, with that beautiful insight, I'm going to ask you our final three questions
Okay.
that I ask everybody. There's probably a really long list that you have to choose from, but what was the best hospitality experience you've ever had?
Yes, there is a long list, but what I think of is really any moment that can cater to me in a way that I didn't expect for myself, and one thing that I'm thinking about is I went to Croatia, and what's interesting about this particular trip is I wouldn't say it was, like, borderline, like, midlife crisis because 'cause I'm not midlife yet, but I was turning 30, and so part of that and it's funny, leading up to that moment, everyone tells you, "Oh, when you hit 30, that's when you're gonna feel all the things," and I was like, "I'll be fine," and I swear I was 29 and, 2 minutes left, and just everything was just like, "I've gotta do something meaningful for me." So, anyway, I went on this, like, solo trip ahead of my 30th birthday, which I think you were you at my 30th birthday party? I think you were.
I was. I
Yes,
was.
you were. But ahead of that party that I planned, I went on this solo trip to Croatia where I drove down. They said one of the top 10 travel experiences everybody should do is driving down the Dalmatian coast. And
Mm,
I can't recommend that more. It's the most beautiful, and I obviously lived in California, and I've driven up the one that's beautiful too, but there's something about that drive and the peace that I experienced on it. I ended up in Dubrovnik and Split, and I had an Airbnb actually, and the host of that Airbnb, his mom lived right above me, or the room that I was renting out, and we were texting a little bit, and he realized I was alone, obviously, and he was like, "Hey, I'm not trying to be weird or anything, but your message about, spending your solo travel and, alone and finding a new place really resonated with me. Let me know if you need any tips or anything." And I was like, "No, it's fine. I care about food and just walking around." Every single day I was there, when his mom made lunch for herself or him, she dropped it, at the door of where I was staying, and he
mm,
was like, "Hey, I didn't know my mom did this, but I told her about you, and there's some food there. I'm not sure if you're there, but every single day she brought me food," and I was there for 4 days, so it wasn't like a long trip, but she brought me food every day. He checked in, turns out he was a former cop,
mhm.
and so there was a level of trust there as well, and he set up and arranged things for me without my asking and was like, "Hey, I know that you're still here. You don't have to take me up on this, but I've made your reservation here, 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 and here. It's my buddy who owns this fish restaurant. It's the freshest seafood in the city. Like, go check it out. If you don't show up, no worries, no problem. It was the most thoughtful thing because he didn't know me well, but the idea that, "Hey, here it is in case you need it," without the pressure, and I did all of them, like, almost all of them,
Yeah.
where I was able to show up and they were able to cater to me in a way that was just meaningful because it was locally driven. It was like, "Let me
Right.
show you our area, our place, and our level of service in a meaningful way," and so that's probably one of the best. I mean, he got his mom involved, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I harken back to that example a lot sometimes.
Yeah, and especially if you went into that trip feeling the way that you did, to
Oh my
have
god.
that stranger essentially care for you,
Yeah,
it's really kind.
it was really cool. He became my photographer too by the end of that trip, so it was
Wow.
like we became good friends.
So on the complete opposite side of his incredible experience, what has been the worst hospitality experience you've ever had?
You know, I have quite a few of these, and I feel like, and don't hate me for not being as specific, but I've had too many examples of process over person.
Hmm.
And any experience, and I had one recently with an airline, and I've had it in hotels as well, where you're asking something that is seemingly very simple, but because there's a process in place or an SOP that
Mhm.
says different, well, I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't do this because hotel policy. And I'm not talking, hey, I want you to give me medicine, right? Things that
Right.
could be a liability type thing. But I've had too many experiences within hospitality and different facets of it within it where people want to do better or want to do more, but can't because one, either they're not empowered, or two, there's this process in place that they're so beholden to for no reason sometimes, right? Like common sense not trumping or personalization not trumping process. Those are any experience, as you asked me that I thought of, that was the root
The root cause.
problem and
Yeah.
challenge for me that it was just like, yeah, but I I do what you do. I'm on the and even if I didn't, this isn't that hard, right?
Yeah.
Like that's happened too frequently to count, but I'd say that's my way of chickening out of being too specific, but to be honest, that's been the most consistent when I think of not so great experiences.
Yeah, it's actually more helpful because it's identifying the problem as
Mhm.
opposed to saying like this was a bad experience. It's like
Yeah,
this is the root cause of all
yeah.
of these bad experiences.
Mhm.
And final question for you. What does hospitality mean to you? And is there anyone or any brand besides, of course, your brands that has truly mastered it?
I think of hospitality a lot like the golden rule, where, we were taught to evolve the treat people how you want to be treated to treat people how they want to be treated. And I think that is the core of hospitality for me. Showing up and connecting with people in a way that is meaningful to them. We are here to be of service. We are here to be a place that you can have core memories, whether it is something positive or something not so great, right? We have people that are grieving when they come stay with us or bereaving, and we also have people who are celebrating. So, the core of hospitality to me is meeting people where they are and being that conduit to that core memory in a way that is meaningful and really can set an imprint. And when I think about the landscape of where we are and hospitality brands, the brands that do that well, they know their guests, they're able to personalize them, and they're able to open up, a world to their guests that they didn't know, and I know there's been some examples of, like, people saying their mom, but everything is, what do they say? 2020? In hindsight is 2020, right? So,
Mhm.
I would have never said this growing up that my grandma or my great-grandma, it's actually my great-grandmother, but I would have never been like, "Oh, she's so hospitable." But what I distinctly remember growing up, and this extends, and you'll see this a lot in the Black family and the Black matriarch a lot. Our houses are open to everybody, no
Mhm.
matter who or where you came from.
Mhm.
I distinctly remember, my great grandma, we called her mommy, somebody be coming in town. We've never even met. Well, your cousin Shirley is coming from, this part of Georgia. She's gonna stay with us. It's like, Grandma, we ain't got no room. It's all right. We got a couch out there. She ain't got no place to stay. She gonna be all right. And it's like, well, why are we doing? We don't even like her. We don't even like her mama, But it doesn't matter because this is what you do. Family needs a place to stay. You open up your doors to them. There's a scene in the movie Soul Food about that, and anybody who's seen that, Cousin Faye, right? Like, she comes by, don't nobody know why she here, she's out in the wind, but it is the right thing to do to welcome them into your home, no matter of what preconceived notions you might have about them or they about you, but it's meeting them where they are and providing to them what they need in that moment. And so I think about that both in the way I try to be hospitable in my own home, but also in bringing that to life in what we do.
Right.
So
That's
yeah,
beautiful. Crystal, thank you so much for your time today. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you, and I just really appreciate you being here.
of course. Thank you for having me and thinking of me for this. A great conversation, Katie.
All right, everyone, it's time for today's sweet summary where I break down the key insights and actionable takeaways from today's conversation. How amazing is Crystal, you guys? She shared so many honest and vulnerable insights in that conversation that truthfully, I had a hard time narrowing them down for this short summary. But alas, here we go. We opened by talking about imposter syndrome, something I was surprised to hear she still experiences. Crystal is a super confident woman, something that she said herself. And obviously, she's also extremely accomplished. So to hear that somebody like her still has moments where she doubts herself was both eye opening and reassuring. While we joked about alter egos and stage personas, her advice was sound. Take a breath and start talking. You just might surprise yourself with how much you know. That led to her sharing some incredible words of advice that she received from a former leader. If you're not nervous, it's not worth it. She said that to this day, she reminds herself that it's not real or worth it if you're not feeling something. Always be nervous, chase those nerves. I love the lens she filters new ideas through. NBDB, never been done before. Something she learned at Apple. She's constantly challenging herself and her team to do new things. And if for some reason they can't do something new, then at least do something in a new way. I also liked when she talked about the evolution of the golden rule. It's no longer about treating people the way you want to be treated, but rather treating people the way they want to be treated. And Crystal's sharp observation skills must make her great at this. Something else that Crystal said that really stuck with me was everything I do is driven by the guest. She said that the beauty of her role lies in its complexity, navigating the ever changing landscape of consumer expectations while staying true to each of her individual brands. She shared her secret sauce to brand building. First, start with a consumer insight, then layer in industry or landscape insights, looking at what your competitors are doing and finding where there's white space. And last, meet that need. It sounds simple enough, but Crystal also emphasized that it must be done in a way that is authentic, relevant, and real. Ironically, I couldn't find three more fitting words to describe Crystal herself.